talk about the Olympics. Where was your first Olympics?
I competed in Athens, Beijing and London.
I'm sat looking at a silver medal and it's an incredible thing.
Just because I'm a Christian didn't make me any less competitive. I was highly competitive. On the rowing machine, I beat all the boys.
Wow.
And on the water, I came last by a long way. At that point, when I wasn't selected for Sydney, I really questioned God at that point. You know, when I retire, I lose my identity.
So what does it take to be, an Olympian? I mean, you're just made of different stuff, Debbie, Hello and welcome to today's podcast, the Together podcast. I'm Ian Young and this is a God TV production. I'm here with our special guest, Debbie Flood. Debbie, it's really nice for you to join us. Thank you for coming all the way from...
Pleasure to be here, yeah.
High Wycombe, was it?
High Wycombe, yeah.
Yeah, you've driven today, so I really appreciate that. Debbie, on this podcast, what we're trying to do is have some real conversations about faith and how God has worked in and through us. Now, you've got a very special experience that most of us will never experience, which is as a medal-winning, Olympian. But also, you've had a whole life since then as well that, we're excited to explore and what it meant to be a Christian and to follow Christ, through that process. So I'm excited to get to know more. But often for our viewers, when we're listening to people, especially in the church, we're told that we should be discerning of, whose advice we take and who do we take seriously and why should we trust Ian and Debbie Flood, And so I just want to get to know who you are, who is Debbie Flood? So that's my first question is who are you? How would you identify? How should I introduce you if I was going to give you a big introduction?
That's a great question. Oh, I remember when I used to kind of do a little intro on myself. I used to say I'm a crazy busy person. I'm a Christian. I love life, and I've got a wonderful family, and love serving my community. But it's hard because when you get interviewed, you're often identified as Debbie the rower.
Right.
And so, that you want the list of how long you've been rowing and the list of medals and accolades, which is, it's great. I love sharing that and I love talking about that. It was a big part of my life that I'm extremely passionate about. Being part of the Olympic team and the GB team was incredible. For me, it was, it's just a big part of my life, but one that God mightily and massively used. And, I'm really thankful for that. And it has been a big part of where I've learned a lot about myself, where God's taught me. And I just, I absolutely love talking about rowing. I love talking about my faith and just generally sharing life.
Yeah. And so let's talk about your faith. Have you always been a Christian? Did you grow up in a Christian household? How did you meet Jesus? Share a bit of your testimony.
Yeah, so I did grow up in a Christian home. I would say that I didn't make that decision for myself until I was 15. But when I grew up in a Christian home. My grandparents were missionaries in Liberia. Wow. So that's all I knew from young. If you'd have asked me when I was a young teenager, are you a Christian? Do you believe in God? I would have said yes at that point because I thought it was automatic. I thought because I was in a Christian family, because I went to church, that I was a Christian. And so I would have answered at that point, yes. Now, don't get me wrong, even at that point, I did genuinely believe there was a God. I was at the point in my life where I just knew life was precious and awesome and that we couldn't just be a bag of chemicals, that life is precious. And, there was something inside me that resonated with the fact that, we were made by God. But at that point also, I was very happy to accept that fact, but then just get on with my life. So for me, really, sport was my motivator. Sport was my life. And from a young age, I was involved in sport. Again, that was something that God used to really save my life in a way. I was actually quite a disruptive and naughty youngster. But when I was 15, I joined our youth group at church. Up until that point, I'd obviously been in Sunday school. And when I got to the age where I shouldn't be in Sunday school, I just didn't want to sit in the service. So I would kind of make excuses, and I'd ask if I could stay in Sunday school to help out, because I wasn't really interested in sitting in the service. It was something we did as a family. It was fine, but it wasn't anything more than that for me. And then one of the older youth sat next to me one day, and I was about to get up to go to Sunday school, and she said, "Why don't you sit in the service today?" And I was like, "Oh, no." And I sat in the service, and at the end, she invited me to join the youth club. And I was slightly younger than it was an older age group at that youth club at that time. But I didn't know how to say no. So I said yes, and I went along. And just a wonderful, faithful Bible teaching youth group leader called Jennifer. And, she just taught the Bible. She shared God's word, and I started to listen, which I think I hadn't really been properly listening before. And I started to listen. I started to hear about who Jesus was, the life he lived, why he died for me. And I suddenly realised that, yes, God gives us life. Yes, God's given me passions and abilities, and I love sport. But actually, first and foremost, God wants a relationship with us. And that was the point where I realised I don't have that. But yes, surely that makes total sense, because I believed that God was real. That resonated with my spirit, and realising that he actually wanted a personal relationship with me through me turning to Jesus was just, that was my first simple step on my journey of being a Christian. I became a Christian when I prayed the prayer. I acknowledged that I needed Jesus. I acknowledged that I'd been doing my own thing, living my own life, not acknowledging God really. And I wanted to turn to him, and I wanted to become his child. And that was, in my 15-year-old way, my starting point. And,
nice.
It's been a journey ever since. And yeah, at the time, it didn't feel like a big change. But as I've gotten older and I've looked back over that time, it was a huge, huge change. I did not notice it, didn't realise it, but it was. It was a big change, yeah.
I guess it's the first time you make a decision, because I didn't make a decision until I was an adult. I didn't grow up in a Christian family. It felt more considered, because I didn't understand, the spirit and the heart, and it didn't have a background. And I think sometimes that decision can almost be harder if you have grown up with it, because you're like, oh yeah, I am a Christian, I don't need to think about it or consider it. And then people get older and think, like you say, there's this relationship. So you said you were like a naughty child, but really, when did sport come into your life? And rowing's a really specific sport that needs specific equipment and rivers and things. How does that come about? Did you seek it out, or is it because where you lived? Tell me a bit about how did Debbie get in sport? What sport are you into, and how did you end up on rowing?
Yeah,
no, it's multiple questions.
That's all right.
The same story.
Yeah. So, we were a sporty family. My dad loved marathon running. My mum just liked being active and would potter around on her bike. She wouldn't like me to say she potters on her bike, but she used to go on a bike
or she'd go for a run. Yeah.
Well, not seriously, but she wouldn't like the word potter.
What's your mum and dad's name?
Barbara and John.
Hi, Barbara and John. Sorry, Mum.
Sorry, Mum.
Sorry for the pottering.
But yeah, really sporty family. And so from a young age, really, I used to go running with my dad, and I'd part run, part walk on the walls, holding his hands. We'd do little fun runs. I remember starting a fun run. I mean, I don't know how old I was. I was probably 4 or 5. And I do remember it. And we started, and they let us start ahead of everyone, because I was actually also very little as a child, small. And we set off, I don't know how long it was in front of everyone else. It was a local fun run. And we never saw anyone for the whole race. We crossed the line first because they'd let us have such a head start. But I absolutely loved running, and I loved spending time running with my dad as well. And so that was from an early age. And then I really struggled.
Do you think they have to call a fun run because it's not fun? They have to remind you it's a fun run.
It is fun. I struggled at school because I just struggled forming friends. I felt very alone. I look back on my younger years and I almost feel like I didn't have a conscience. Like I knew things were wrong, but it didn't bother me at all. You know, I would just steal and lie to get out of class. I'd tell the teachers that my mum was in hospital, that I needed to do a card. This was primary school. Yeah. You know, I stole the milk money. I remember lining up, and it was in my little, you know, girl's handbag purse. And yeah, I stole from my parents. I was in the police station when I was 7 for shoplifting. And I used to dream about burgling houses. I mean, where it came from, I don't know. You know, I felt like I was very loved. We didn't have much money. Maybe that was part of it. Didn't feel like I had what others had. But I felt That's
very young, isn't it?
It was very young. It was very, very strange in a way because, like, you know, I was happy at home. I loved being at home. Like, my brother was a bit my best friend because we didn't quite live near school at that time.
How did you feel at the time? Because I feel quite shocked to hear that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make me judge you. I'm just like,
no.
Oh, I wonder what makes a little girl have those thoughts. You know, like, how do you feel about it now, talking about it?
It's sad because I can kind of picture myself, you know, back in those times. And I think I felt different, partly because maybe I didn't have the clothes that everyone else had. So, like, I remember one day I did have a friend at one point. I'm sure I can't remember many, but I definitely had one who would bring in clothes for me. Right. So I'd go to school and then I'd go to the change rooms and she'd give me a pair of jeans to put on or a necklace or something. Right. I remember I'd just walk out of school if I didn't want to be there. Right. I mean, I was primary school age. I mean, what was I thinking? But I didn't care. It didn't bother me. I didn't have any fear of that. I knew things were wrong because I would hide them when I stole things. Right. You know, my poor mum, I think probably blocks out this time of life, but, you know, my parents would have to check my lunchbox if I'd been to a friend's house because I would just fill it with their things, leave the house with their stuff. Right. And I kind of look back and it was genuinely felt like I didn't really have a conscience because I didn't really care. It was all about me and I just did my own thing. And so it ties back into sport because sport was something that I'd started to do at a young age and I was becoming good at. And actually, when I got to middle school, because back in those days we had primary school, middle school, upper school.
So what age is middle school?
So middle school must have been from age 8 or 9, I think. And when I got to middle school, at that point I was becoming quite a good runner. And I'd never engaged with teachers before. Never really engaged with teachers. I'd pretend to faint in class. I wasn't interested in school. And so...
Did you struggle academically?
I did. And then I think school had gone to my parents and said, look, she's really struggling. And my dad was a maths teacher. And he'd said, okay, well, I'll help her with her maths. And actually, again, I loved doing stuff with my dad. So he started helping me with my maths. We'd just work through workbooks together. And I might get a little Barbie doll at the end of or something. And probably that was probably an exciting incentive for me as well. But then I really loved maths and I got really good at maths. And actually, I ended up doing my GCSE maths when I was 10. Right. So again, that's a whole other side. I loved doing things with my family and I engaged with my family well, but I didn't engage outside of my family very well. Yeah. But then when I got to middle school, I really engaged well with the PE teacher because they encouraged me. Right. And then I suddenly felt like I was being personally encouraged by a teacher and I loved the running and I started to realise I was good at running and that, I guess, gave me a bit of confidence maybe. And then gradually I started then to engage more in school. But it was still just me. I didn't feel like I had a particular friendship group. In fact, it's interesting because I felt, you know, through school I was actually quite bullied in a few ways. Now I wore spectacles, I wore glasses, and I always remember standing up for myself. I never had any fear, but then I'd get into trouble because I'd get into fights. And it was a bit of a crazy time, really. Yeah. And then, yeah, and it was all about me. I wasn't interested in anyone else. And so as I look back to that time, that's where I can recognise the change, because when I did become a Christian when I was 15, that was just before going into sixth form. And I remember in sixth form, and it's the first time I really can say that I remember doing something for someone. So my friend got kicked out of home because she got pregnant. And I remember I did a paper round. I remember giving her all my paper round money.
Wow.
And that's the first time I can ever remember doing something for someone else.
Right.
And since then, God's really grown my heart for others, it's just really interesting. And you wouldn't think that either in a world of sport where it can be quite a selfish world, but actually that is something that God has grown in me even through my sporting life. And that is a difference between becoming a Christian and before that time for me. That's the change that I wouldn't have recognised at the time, but I can see it now and it's extremely different.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Wow. So you're running at school. You keep using the word sport as a whole.
Yeah.
So what other sports, because you've obviously realised you're good at running, so do you start on the running team or how do you get into the rowing?
Yeah. So running was my kind of first love of sport because I did it with my dad and that's how I started in sport. But we'd also watch, major championships or the Olympics on telly and I used to think, wow, they're superhuman. It's pretty incredible. But I also knew that I loved sport and I really believed even at a younger age that, God had given me the ability and the passion for it. And so I used to watch the Olympics and think, I wonder if I would ever be able to do that. I wonder if ever I'd be, that good. And so as a runner, I was quite small when I was younger. But then as I kind of grew in age, I grew in bulk and in height. And then all the smaller runners started getting faster than me. So I loved it, but I also loved competing. Me and my brother both did the same sports, but I was always the one who wanted to compete and wanted to see my times or wanted to do a race.
Right.
And I used to basically want to kind of represent. So I represented Yorkshire in cross-country running and on the track. And then I did shot put and the same with that. And then, because I went to, it was not a rough area, but basically I walked to school through a bit of a rough area. So my parents wanted to make sure we could look after ourselves. So we did judo and karate as well. And I became really good at judo. Got into the GB judo team for juniors. And I thought, maybe this is the sport that's going to take me to the Olympics. Maybe I'm going to represent my country in this sport. And I did as a junior level. But really at that point I was, what would I have been, 16, 17, and I had a very short-term plan. I wanted to do the Olympics in Sydney, tick the box, and then get on with my life. I wanted to be a veterinary surgeon, grew up in Yorkshire, James Herriot country. I'd done all the work experience. I'd worked on farms, I'd done lambing, I'd worked in an abattoir. I was going to be a vet. That was my life plan. But the judo, I kept getting injured. The more I trained, you're being thrown from a height of, whatever, and there's constant little niggles and injuries. And as part of our training for the judo, we used the rowing machine.
Right.
In the gym. I had a gym that gave me free membership and they were super supportive. And the rowing machine was really good. It's good for fitness, all round fitness, because you're using kind of every part of your body and the exercise.
I hate a rowing machine,
And most rowers would say the same thing, but I wasn't a rower at the time.
I got from 5 minutes to 10 minutes and I was like, I'm amazing.
It's a great piece of equipment.
It is.
But I was just using it for fitness, really. And someone came up to me in the gym one day and said, do you row? And I was basically like, what do you mean? I'd never rowed in my life. This was back in, what was I then? I was 17, so 97. Rowing was not in the public radar at all. It was a very...
Not in Yorkshire, it wasn't.
Certainly not in Yorkshire. Little did I know, but there was a little bit there. There was a rowing club, a couple of rowing clubs, but I wouldn't have known.
Right.
My school didn't row. I'd never seen it on the television. It just wasn't in the public limelight like it was after 2000 when Sir Steve won his 5th gold medal. And so I was like, what are you talking about?
You had to get to 5 for it to be noticed.
Well, right? I know, crazy. But they said, you're doing really good times on the rowing machine. And I think because I'd done sport all my life.
So who noticed that? Do you remember who that was?
It was Roy, who was still a great friend now, Roy Hollingworth. He was someone who would always see how I was doing and ask how the judo was going, and would always come and chat.
So who's Roy in your life?
Yeah, no, he used to call himself the friendly gremlin. He would always just like follow my career, but also he was just a good egg. He would always come and say hello, see how I was doing. One of the older gentlemen at the gym.
Oh, right, okay. So just someone encouraging
gym
you,
member,
right?
just encouraging me. Yeah, and we just became friends, and we've remained friends, and he's kind of followed and supported. And I'll see him and his wife, Sheila, when I go back to Yorkshire. They're great. And so, my dad looked it up online and suddenly discovered there's this whole world of indoor rowing machine rankings and racing, and I was basically ranked the 3rd junior in the country on rowing machine times.
Wow.
So we decided to look for a rowing course, but more just for something different to do in the summer. Like, judo is becoming quite intense. You know, it was hard work. I wasn't enjoying it quite as much because I kept getting little injuries.
Yeah.
Also, as a 16, 17-year-old girl, I felt like a bit of an outsider. Again, just a bit of a layering from my kind of feeling like a bit of an outsider when I was younger as well. From Yorkshire, you know, I travelled down to the squad training sessions, and, you know, a lot of the squad were based around the home counties. High Wycombe, actually. I was one of the bases. I used to travel to High Wycombe around that way. But I didn't really feel part of the crowd, part of the group. I was a bit of an outsider. And so, you know, for me as a 16, 17-year-old girl, you know, that makes a difference, makes a big difference. And I went on this Learn to Row course for a bit
something's changed.
Yeah.
Because definitely, you know, you said before that, because you weren't bothered, you were a loner, you didn't care. It was all about self. And now you're saying, as a 17-year-old, like, belonging really mattered.
Yeah, it did make a difference.
So, like, God's
definitely
touched your heart at 15 for sure. And like, start already working on,
definitely,
you know, the Debbie we see in front of us today.
Yeah, that's true. And yes, I went on a Learn to Row course in London. I kind of thought, I'll do that, have a bit of fun, see how it goes. Little did I know how technical the sport is. I mean, I couldn't just get on the water and row. You know, I fell in more than I was rowing because, you know, you're in these single boats which are super long and super narrow, and it's just different. I mean, the structure of the process and the movements that you make are the same, but you've got balance to worry about. And so I couldn't believe that I couldn't pick it up. I mean, I didn't get it. I just naturally didn't pick it up at all. But at the end of the first week...
So that's interesting. So you've got this natural fitness ability.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're third on the junior times of rowing machine.
Yeah.
But you can't row a boat more than 10 metres.
No. But it's interesting because it was the similar... Well, not similar in the...
Did you do it on your own at first?
Yeah. So you did a bit of crew boat. So you did a bit with other people, and then the balance is a little bit easier with that. But then the majority of it was in singles weight, because then you can learn yourself and understand what movements make what difference in the boat. But interestingly, in the judo, I kind of relied on my fitness and strength as well.
Right.
I was fit and strong and not as technical. So I generally won fights on the ground. So I'd kind of rag someone around onto the ground.
Yeah. And
then I knew my fitness and strength would like be able to pin them down or whatever on the ground. Whereas I wasn't technical enough to throw well.
Right.
So yeah, in a similar way, the technical side was just a real struggle, or not as natural as my strength, I think. So I did this Learn to Row course, and on the final day, we did a time trial on the water where you just get timed from start to finish, and then we did a race on the rowing machine for over 1,000 metres. And on the rowing machine, I beat all the boys.
Wow.
And on the water, I came last by a long way. But there was just something about it.
Right.
There was just something about it. I also found that world immediately friendly. I really enjoyed it. And there was a coach there, an old boy called Alec Hodges, no longer with us, but he, you know, and a lot of the kind of sports clubs have got a person who just loves the sport and wants to teach youngsters. And he was one of those guys. And he said to me, "You need to row. I'm going to help you in any way I can."
Wow.
So we kind of worked out why there was some rowing clubs back in Yorkshire, and there was Bradford Rowing Club, which had this little 500-metre stretch. And I joined there, and I got good at turning around It's a very short stretch, but I just didn't improve.
Right.
I just didn't improve to start with. And they really tried to help me. But again, there wasn't many juniors around.
What kept you going? Because I think if I think about the things that I was good at that age, and I'd definitely binned some stuff off that in my later life has become important to me, like golf, for example. That I just couldn't get the technical side of it, and as I've got more patient as I'm older, but yet you seem to have stayed at something that you weren't because you were good at everything else, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think kept your attention on it?
There came a point, and again, God brings people across our paths. So there came a point where I wasn't improving. I was doing my A-levels at the time, so I was 17. And I was really focusing on them. By this point, I was working hard at school, but I was using all my spare time to practice rowing. But I was not improving at all. I was, losing all the novice races. And, the question came up, should I carry on? And the coaches at the club were saying, look, row, but you're not going to, they didn't say it in as many words, but, realistically, you're not going to become an Olympic rower for Sydney. And I was still in touch with Alec Hodges, who was in London at Tideway Scullers, and I said to him, look, I don't think it's going to work. Thanks so much for helping me, but because he was keeping in touch and seeing how I was getting on, he said, no, come up to London. I want to introduce you to someone. And so we drove up to London, and he introduced me to a guy called Mark Banks, who at the time was the chief junior coach of the British junior team. And his job is to coach the top people in the country. Now, normally, he wouldn't go and see new people. He's going to have parents.
On people that can't.
Exactly. Exactly. So, coaches and parents and teachers will be saying to him all the time, we've got this person, we've got this boy, we've got this girl. And but he would never go and look. It's not his job to go and look.
Yeah.
It's their job to send them to trials, and he will see how they do at trials.
Right.
But for some reason, he came. He'd not heard of Alec before. He'd obviously was intrigued by my time on the rowing machine. And so he came across to see me, watched me on the rowing machine, was quite impressed, watched me on the water. I was on the wrong side of the river. I nearly fell in. It was really terrible. But he sat me down afterwards and chatted me for about half an hour. And after this half an hour, he said, right, I'm going to take you on. Wow. I'm going to send you a training program. I'm going to speak to you on the phone every week to see how you're getting on with that program. Alec will give you a boat that you can take down to Yorkshire and do your own thing with that. And he said, you need to come to trials in November. And it doesn't matter how you do at trials. I'll bring you on the first junior GB training camp in Spain, in Seville. It doesn't matter how you do at trials, but come to trials and then we'll go on training camp. We'll see how you do. And I couldn't believe what my ears were hearing.
Well, I can't believe it. Do you know, have you ever asked?
Yeah, and he said,
why you did that?
He said, I don't know why, but I just saw something in you that I thought you'd make it.
Wow.
Yeah. But this is again, and again, as I look back in my life, which I did later, a few years after this, and seeing God's hand in bringing people across my path, what did I need to achieve in rowing? I needed a technical ability. And this guy was genuinely one of the best technical coaches in the absolute country.
Yeah.
And so under his kind of tuition and technical coaching, I then progressed rapidly, really quickly.
So what was the difference? Because, what was he teaching you that, because he wasn't even there, right? So I guess there was people at the club who were trying to help you. Like, what was the difference?
So he sent me the programme, but then I would have to travel to Nottingham every weekend. So they gave me petrol money to do so because we didn't really have that.
Wow.
So they had a trust that they could use for that. And so my dad would drive me to Nottingham every weekend. He would come down to Nottingham with the top junior rowers that he was already coaching. And they would just lap me round the lake, round to Nottingham. They would have done like 8 laps and I would have done like 1 lap. But he coached me in my single, but then he also put me out in a double with someone who was really good.
Right.
Who was, he wasn't a junior rower, but he was more like a coach as well. But he was like a helping Mark with coaching. And he would sit in the double with me and stabilise the boat and talk to me as I rowed. And I had that platform then that was stable and I could just learn how to row with a stable boat.
Yeah, that's...
And he just, I just progressed. So I came last at December trials. I can't remember if it was December or November. It was winter trials. Came last out of over 100 people by about 2.5 minutes, which is a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then...
It's in the boat race.
Yeah,
Like this, you know?
yeah. And then in February, I came 7th. And then at final trials in the spring, I won.
That's unbelievable.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Like, what were the people, the other racers
Yeah.
saying? Because when you finish 2.5 minutes behind, they must be asking why she's here, right?
So then there was a lot of unease. There was a lot of questions about why I'd been invited to Seville.
Right.
Because only the top 8 or 10 scullers had been invited to Seville.
Yeah.
And I was one of those 10, and I wasn't the top. And so he was questioned by a lot of the coaches saying, why are you allowing this girl? It just wasn't procedure. You just don't do that.
Yeah.
You go to trials, you earn your right to go on training camp. And he just said to the coaches, you'll see, she'll be good. And gradually over time, that was shown that I did have that capability. Yeah, and very unusual. I think, like I said, I had that real base of fitness. I had the strength that it needed teaching to be technical so that I could actually transfer that into the boat.
Into the water, yeah.
But, it was still pretty raw. Even I could move my single. I look back and I'm like, how? I don't know how. I mean, even when we went to the World Championships in 98, I remember I couldn't even follow well. So they couldn't put me at what we would call bow. I was put at stroke so that the girl who was experienced could follow me.
Right.
Because I couldn't follow. Like, I wasn't experienced enough. So I was just put at stroke and then told go,
Right.
And so it was still pretty raw back in those days. But I don't know, it just worked. And then for me, that obviously ignited rekindled my excitement to try and go to the Sydney Olympics. So I did my junior world championships in 1998. We got a bronze medal there. And then I was like, right, 2 years. And then I'm going to train full time. I'm going to go to the Sydney Olympics and then I'll become a veterinary surgeon. And I moved down from Yorkshire, down to the Reading area, which is where my coach Mark Banks at that time was living. He was still obviously coaching the junior team, but I wasn't a junior anymore, but I just tagged on and with the juniors, and I was an under 23 at that point, and I just joined in with everyone and he continued to coach me full time. It was an intense 2 years. I'd moved from school, I'd moved away from friends and family, into a world I didn't know, a group of people I didn't really know, coach I didn't really know yet. But again, I was just immediately accepted in that environment. It could have been the same as my previous experiences because I was an outsider. I was good on the rowing machine. I'd been given these opportunities. I could have not been liked, but I immediately just fitted in with everyone. It was interesting. I mean, I remember, in fact, that Seville camp, we got off the plane, and I'll never forget this memory. We got off the plane, and a girl came up to me and she said, "How was your flight?" And I genuinely didn't understand the question. I said, "The same as yours." I didn't know what to say because I didn't understand that she was just saying, "Yeah, are you all right? How are you doing?" I didn't get it. I was like, why is someone asking how the flight was when they were on the same flight? Yeah. And it's just, that even though, again, I hadn't earned my place to be there, one of the top rowers was asking how I was doing. And, so it was a very different environment to come into. And that was also something that really encouraged me to keep going in there. Yeah.
And where was your faith in all this? Like, did you talk about Jesus? Were there other Christians there? Like, or was that, was it all sport and,
Yeah. So I became a Christian when I was 15, as I'd said. And looking back, I feel so grateful that it was at that point. When I was 15, that was really just before going into the crazy world of elite sport, into first the judo and then the rowing. But I was also a very quiet youngster, partly probably because of not being that social, not having had a friendship group, just being my own person. I was still quite quiet. And So when I first got into the rowing team, so after juniors, because I'd kind of burst onto the scene really quickly, I got interviewed by James Cracknell, who at the time was one of the top rowers, heading into Sydney. And he interviewed me for the National Rowing magazine, which went out to every rower in the country. And, asking me general rowing questions like, where's my favourite place to row, and, how I got into the sport and things like that. But he asked me what I did in my spare time. And I'd mentioned I was a Christian, I went to church, that I was involved in things during the week.
Right.
And I didn't even think anything of it. I'd never been interviewed before. I'd never been asked in that capacity.
It was just your life.
About my faith. I was just saying what I did with my time, and not really, in a way, I think in the back of my head, I probably thought I probably won't mention that. Right. Because, I guess at that point, even then I was aware that maybe they wouldn't mention it because they didn't want to. Anyway, next thing I knew, this went out to every single row in the country that I was a Christian, and that was a big part of my life. And at first I was like, oh, wow, that's a big thing. But I didn't think much apart from that. I wasn't worried about it. I acknowledged that, wow, that was now everyone knows I'm a Christian. I wonder what that is going to be like. And it was amazing, actually. It meant that people just approached me with conversations. I mean, I would be at a regatta and a random person that I don't know would come up to me and say, I'm a Christian too. It was actually super encouraging. But it came with, as I started to get into the team and under 23 team at that point and make friends, and it came with a lot of banter as well. People would be like, oh, Debbie's in our boat today. That means God's on our side. Right. There's quite a banter kind of environment, the rowing and training environment. So part banter, part encouragements. Also, over time, as I had deeper conversations with people, there could be quite confrontational conversations with someone really pushing back at me on why I believe, what I believe and what I believe, and how does Christian fit in with life, but sometimes very confrontational. And I felt in a way I felt under-equipped because I was still, I feel like I was early on in my faith in terms of biblical knowledge. So I sometimes didn't have answers for people, but it didn't affect my own faith. It made me feel a little bit inadequate that I couldn't answer their questions. But, I think, God just gave me a real solid sense of him, even without the kind of depth of biblical knowledge at that point. And again, just that real sense of, being thankful for the opportunities I had, the life that was put in front of me, knowing that he'd given me the abilities and passions and opportunities to row, wanting to be grateful for that, and actually just wanting to love rowing and where God had put me for that time. Yeah. And so I think I just kind of rested in that, really, and tried to be myself. And as I formed friendships with people, which I formed some amazing friendships really early on, and, having moved away from home and then lived with other rowers and absolutely loved it. But then people just get to know you, and just you talk about, I always did talk about life, and I loved to chat at that point. And I was kind of gaining my confidence in just being real with people and sharing life and talking, and I love to invite people to events. So I was always at churches that were either had events on, or I was told of an event going on, and I'd invite people. Interestingly, I'd invite people that I thought would come. And so I remember one day I hadn't invited one of my housemates, and there was about 5 of us going to a tough talk. It was like a weightlifting group, or so I can't remember now. Something, they were like bodybuilders, I think. Right. And so I invited the people that I thought would be interested and would quite enjoy that. And my housemate said, "Why haven't you invited me?" And I was like, "Oh, please come. Like, I didn't think you'd be interested." And he said, "Well, I'd like to come." And so it was a real learning curve of, not putting people in boxes, but actually just inviting people, and they can say no or they can say yes. And so, being known as a Christian early on, kind of out of my control, was actually a real blessing because, I'm not sure. Yeah, I would have
You
been
never knew
myself.
you wanted to be an evangelist in sport, but God put you in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what does it take to be, an Olympian and an elite athlete? Because you've gone from last place to first place. I've got a bunch of questions of like, what does training look like? I just imagine it's like all protein shakes and like no life and, living with other athletes sounds terrible, but it must have been a laugh, And so what does it really look like? Like, what's the focus? How much work is it?
Yeah.
What are the people that are around you? How do you pay for it all? There'll be people out there that will be, the young Debbie going, I wonder if I can be Olympian. But actually, they only see the gold medal, but there's 4 years of hard work before that. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, we work in Olympic cycles. It's not just about that 1 year. It is that, there's 4 years that runs up to that Olympiad. If you start at the beginning of that Olympiad. For me, when I first started, I only had that 2 year space, but essentially full-time, being a full-time elite athlete looks the same whatever year it is. We train 2 or 3 times a day, twice on the water, once in the gym on a third session, whether that be doing weights or like core stability or on the rowing machine. And so it is full time.
Yeah.
You get 3 weeks off a year after the World Championships or the Olympics, depending on the year it is. Apart from that, you get the occasional day. So if you've raced, you get the day off afterwards. Sometimes you get a travelling day. Occasionally we got Sundays off. And so it's full on, no weekends, no lie-ins. That it becomes your world, really, and everything else practically revolves around it in terms of your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep, your socialising. To answer some of your questions, living with rowers, I loved it. And again, for me, I hadn't had that before, that kind of intense living with other people, athletes, friendships, but I loved it. And it's interesting. I naturally developed into being the mum. I'd feed everyone. I loved cooking. I loved having people around. So actually, it was nice because it almost felt like I was coming into a family. And because we were all, those that I hung out with at that point, we were all quite young, I got to know their parents as well. So I ended up actually having lots of second families and people who looked out for me. And even over the years, got to a point with some of those second families, even if they're not in, I know where the spare key is. And if I'm feeling a bit down, I'm going to go and sit on their sofa and watch their telly. I really found a welcoming world and, expanded my kind of family, if you like. And so I loved that. In terms of the training full time, I didn't always enjoy training. I always joke about rowing being the sport I would have never chosen because, I love racing. I love short things. I love weights. I love what we call pieces, so short and sharp and fast and hard. Not most of the training that we do for rowing, which is miles and miles and hours of mileage. Partly because it's a technical sport, partly because it's an endurance sport. It wouldn't have been my choice, but that's where I ended up. And so the balance of that kind of training lifestyle is ups and downs. You're tired all the time, but you get used to it. It becomes your normal. Nutrition-wise, you have to be on top of it. And, we were really fortunate when I first was in the team, we had a nutritionalist. She'd asked us to do a food diary for a whole week. You had to write down absolutely everything and whatever time you ate it, down to the last fruit pastel or whatever, everything. Right. And then they'd analyse it and then say, okay, you're doing this well, you're doing that well. These are the changes or tweaks that you can make. And it's not that it's particularly specific, but obviously balanced diet is important. How you fuel your body is going to
get enough fuel, I imagine,
and getting enough fuel.
At that training level,
absolutely. We would eat 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day.
Yeah, wow.
Because you're burning it off.
Yeah.
You're burning it off. We would drink 8 to 10 litres of fluid a day because you're sweating it out.
Yeah.
You need to be hydrated to be able to perform and to be able to train. And so we got help around that. Even as youngsters, even as under 23s, we got help with that, which was brilliant. I was fortunate in the sense that, so I started the rowing in 97, 98 when I was a junior. And then as I went into that era, really, lottery funding came in this country in 98, which put money into sport.
Right.
And it really revolutionised sport. So I came in at the perfect timing for help to do so, because there's no way I would have been able to afford to do it myself. Before that kind of grant funding, athletes would pay for themselves to go to the Worlds, they'd pay for themselves, they'd sleep on people's floors, they'd kind of take their boat on the top of their car to wherever they need to go. Whereas, after the funding came in for sport in this country, your boats get transported around the world. You have boat drivers, you have coaches who are paid, and then again, as a national team, we have that support network in terms of psychologists and physiologists and nutritionalists and the doctors and scans when you break. And so it became, even though it's not deemed a professional sport as such, because you don't get prize money for competing, so it's still deemed amateur because you don't get prize money. We were able to have grants to be able to live, that paid for rent and for food. Not enough to save. I think obviously often I think it was a while ago now, it might have changed now, but the average Olympian finished their career, I think £5,000-6,000 in debt. You don't really save. People can sometimes make potentially money if they're a bit more high profile after but you're not kind of paid for winning or for
no, which is the opposite from some sports.
Yeah, it's very different. Yeah,
there's lots of money in that.
Yeah, so money's not the incentive.
It's
it's the racing, it's the Olympics, it's the representing your country, which is a big motivator for all those involved in a sport like rowing.
Wow.
And for me too, I loved competing. Absolutely love competing. That was a big motivator for me. And I knew also that I needed to train well to race well.
And did you know the other Olympians before you went to the Olympics? Like, had you raced against them in other races? You lived near them? Like, I'm thinking of the Netflix series, was it a rivalry,
So within your own sport, it's a strange dynamic, because within your own sport, you're actually competing against each other for 7 months of the year in order to even be selected in the first place. But then obviously the ultimate aim is to compete against the rest of the world. So the dynamic of how to do team well and how to encourage and motivate each other through the year, whilst also trying to improve yourself and be better than someone else that you're trying to encourage, is such a weird dynamic. And I think it took time for us to do that well as a team. But over the years, I was in the GB team for 15 years. Over that time, we got it really, we got lots right in that aspect, which made it a joy to be in the team and to be training together. And again, that feeling like a big family of, sometimes you get on, sometimes you don't, like in any big family, but, learning how to work through that and actually produce performances at the end of the day. But then with other Olympic sports, we actually train quite separately to lots of sports. Bishop Abbey, we used to train quite closely with the hockey players. We're in and out of there as well. But you're really in your own hub and bubble of people. Yeah. So your own team, your own Olympic sports team, but you don't necessarily know others well. And it's interesting because you go to events and someone will say, oh, so-and-so did well in this other sport, how are they feeling? And you're like, you don't want to say, I really don't know them. But, you get to know people because you go to various events together and you go to various celebrations together and, you do media stuff with other sports. But essentially, your own sport is your kind of little hub of people. Then in terms of the rest of the world, you do compete against the same people through the same years. So by the time you get to the Olympics, you do know the other countries well. Some countries you've got a bit of banter with. But then, of course, when you get on the start line, the sunglasses are on, the caps are on, you're down to business. But it's interesting. I mean, we built up quite a good relationship with the German girls who we competed a lot against. And actually, a lot of our training camps were in Germany. And I remember one year, and this was later down the line, because it takes time to, to build that, doesn't it? And they were the best in the world. The German women were the best in the world in sculling for at least the first half of my career. And I remember one year, one of the girls sent me a picture of, because at the end of, I'm jumping a bit, but at the end of the World Championships or any kind of major event, you often swap kit. And so then when you're training, you're just training all sorts of different kit. And it's a bit of a competition to get the cool kit or the random kit and things. And one year, one of the German girls had sent me a picture of them all they were our direct competition in the quad.
Right.
Training in GB all-in-ones in their quad.
Right.
They were out in their GB all-in-ones. And I was like... cheeky.
Yeah.
So then we took a picture of us all in German all-in-ones eating an ice cream. Oh, it was so funny. But you do build up that respect actually for your competitors because you know how hard it is to train. And so you build that respect because you know that it's the same for them. You know, when you go to the Olympics and you're in the village and you look around, well, firstly, rowing being, well, I don't know, maybe it becomes your normal, doesn't it? What you do, whoever you are, your world, your week, that's your normal.
That's normal, yeah.
And then you go to the Olympics and you see people who you deem famous or, you know, who are more maybe in the limelight, and you're like, wow. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, we're all here because we're the best in our country at our sport. And it's very humbling. It's amazing. You know, you're seeing people walk around in their country's colours and you're like, wow, this is, you know, people.
So what's that like? So let's talk about the Olympics. You know, so where was your first Olympics?
Well, my first competitive Olympics was Athens.
Right.
And then I competed in Athens, Beijing and London. But I was also a spare in Sydney. Sydney was the one that I was aiming for originally.
Yeah.
And
that the people said you probably wouldn't go.
Yeah, that's right.
And there you were.
Yeah. And I was there as a reserve. So I didn't make it in the end, which was, it's quite a light bulb year for me, both faith-wise, but also sporting-wise. So, like I said, my life plan was that I was going to finish my A-levels and then I was going to take 2-year gap year, train full-time in that crazy full-time world of sport. I was going to go to Sydney and then become a veterinary surgeon. So I trained full-time, and back in those days, you could decide what boat you were going to go for. And I decided I would go for my single. I wanted to be the single sculler. And so all of those who wanted to be the single sculler would have a race off, and whoever won would represent.
Right.
And so in that race off, I came second. I was leading for most of the way. And then, technically again, I was, 3 years in. Technically, obviously, I was a lot better, but I still wasn't quite there.
Right.
And in the rough water at the end, I lost the race. And at that point, when I wasn't selected for Sydney, at that point in my life as a 20-year-old, that was the lowest I'd ever been. I'd totally crashed out. Everything I'd worked towards wasn't happening. I really questioned God at that point. I felt like I'd wasted 2 years of my life because I hadn't achieved what I wanted to achieve. And I just thought, God, why was I even there? What was the point of those 2 years? If in my head there was no point. And so actually it took my coach to pick me back up at that point and say, look, you've worked hard, you're still at a high standard, you haven't made the Olympics, but you're still at a good standard. You can do under 23 World Championships this year in your single instead. You can do Henley Royal Regatta in your single instead. But at the time, I was like, well, I don't care about those things. I don't want to do them because it wasn't what I was aiming for. But I did, in the end, convince me that I should finish the season, do them. I ended up winning both of those and also being asked to be a reserve in Sydney, and actually had an amazing summer. Wow. I loved the racing. It was the standard I was up to, and it's not necessarily about the winning, but I just realised that I loved the sport, and I had an amazing summer racing. I originally didn't want to go to Sydney. I was going to refuse, and my coach was like, no, you don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't refuse. If you refuse, that's it. That's it for you. And at that point, I'd realised, originally I thought that was the end. I was going to do Sydney and I was going to get on with my life. But
right.
I got to that point of finishing that summer and thought, do you know what? This is just the beginning. It's not the end, as I thought. It's
I think
actually
at 20
the beginning.
It must be really hard to, because 4 years is a long time at 20.
Yeah.
Now it's not, right? But to go, you couldn't imagine doing 3 Olympics.
Yeah.
So to be like, another 4 years before I can do the thing that I thought I was going to do and then get on with my life, it's a real...
Yeah, it was a strange... Yeah, it is, but at the same time, I was at that point then where I really loved what I was doing.
Right.
And I'd made some friends. I could see myself in this world ongoing. Before that point, I mean, I didn't even know that that was something you can do. I didn't even realise that being an athlete was something that you could do for a longer time.
Right.
Again, maybe because rowing wasn't in the limelight, I'd never been part of that world before. I didn't realise that that's what you could do.
Yeah.
The funding had just come in to enable people to train full time. Nice. That, allowed that opportunity.
So what does being at Sydney in a reserve look like? You just sit and drink champagne and watch everyone race,
It's quite hard actually, because you have to be ready to step in whenever needed. And, looking back, I still didn't have the right attitude. I still felt hard done by. I still felt grumpy about not being selected. I still felt like I was good enough. And so, and again, God has shown me that over time, and actually, shown me how also He's changed me over the years and how I would handle things much better as a more mature Christian now. But, it was a hard time because I wanted to be competing. I didn't want to be waiting in case someone got injured or in case I had to step in. Also, realistically, I wasn't good enough. If I'd have had to step in, it would have been so stressful because technically, and following other people and fitting in with another boat, I wasn't there yet. I mean, this was 3 years in, and 3 years might sound like a long time, but I had a lot to learn technically still. I could move my single and I could move a boat with someone who knew me, but it would have been a tall order for me to step into a senior crew and help them do well at the Olympics. It would have been very stressful. And so I kind of I didn't have the greatest attitude. But it was still great. I mean, to experience the Olympics, and Sydney did really well. I mean, the people were friendly. It was an amazing experience.
How did GB do in Sydney? I'm not a rowing fan.
So this was where Sir Steve. This was where Sir Steve won his 5th gold medal, and the 8 won a gold medal, and the women won a silver medal. They had a brilliant year. And so being able to support in the grandstand, even though I still had a slight grump on, it was amazing. And it was a springboard for me into, okay, this is what's to come.
Right.
4 years, the kind of concept of 4 years. At that point, I was still quite fresh-faced in rowing. It was all quite exciting. 4 years didn't faze me. Later down the line, when you know what's coming, another 4 years of grueling, that's when it becomes it became more tricky for me, but like, okay, this is a big commitment, 4 years. Whereas to start with, I was enthusiastic, I was fresh-faced. I was like, I just suddenly had this light bulb revelation that this is going to be a world that I'm going to be in for a while. And also faith-wise, because I went from a point of saying, God, why have I just wasted 2 years? What was the point? To realising that, actually, God's plans are better than my plans. You could have offered me anything else. You could have offered me probably originally, okay, you can row for 15 years rather than 2 years and become a veterinary surgeon. I'm like, no, thanks. Who wants to do that?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have chosen that.
Yeah.
I wanted to row for 2 years and become a veterinary surgeon. That's the best for me.
Yeah.
But I didn't realise what the plans, God had, but also what a blessing that would be. Yeah. And so, again, I mean, that's worked out in other areas of life for me as well, in terms of God just taking me those little steps forward and then helping me to keep going, because actually He grows my heart for that thing, and then therefore I keep walking down that path. Light bulb moment in my faith. One of my favourite Bible passages is trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. And that verse that year in 2000 became an absolute reality for me, in my mind, in my heart, in my spirit. Like, it resonated, and it became, I was like, yeah, the reality of God, that's right there. And so I came back to that, because that was a real up and down year. And then, life is full of ups and downs, isn't it? So in the ups and downs after that, I always came back to that verse and that time, because, I'm quite emotionally led, so my feelings can take me from high to low, but coming back to the truths of who God is and to put my trust in Him was actually really important through the ups and downs over the 15 years, over the next 13 years that was. And So it was important.
Would you say you had like a practice, like not in a religious sense, but did you have a prayer life? Did you read your Bible? Were you going to church? Did that continue through the sport, or did that sort of overwhelm and become your primary focus?
Yeah, so that was something that kind of developed again as God placed people around me, really. So I'd been stuck into this really good youth group back at home in Guiseley. And when I left to go into full-time rowing, my youth group leader rang an organisation, charity called Christians in Sport, and said, we've got this sporty Christian, what do you do? And could you help her or support her or resource her or whatever that looks like? And Christians in Sport work with schools and they work with universities and churches, but they also work with elite athletes and they support them one-to-one, just walking alongside them really in their faith, encouraging them. And that's what they did for me. And so partly I had that. They would regularly meet with me, read the Bible with me, give me just space to talk, have a cuppa with me, see what I maybe needed prayer requests for, but also bring back always God's perspective, in my emotions or in my elations, bringing me, keeping me humble and grounded and, just encouraging me to put my roots down deeper in Christ. And so that was hugely significant through that time. And also I was really blessed to be part of a good church along the way as well. So, and again, just, God brings that, there's so much that he's brought across my path along the way. So I moved to Reading originally because that's where my coach was. And I lodged with a lady from a local church. So I went to church with her for those 2 years. And then after Sydney, I moved, my coach became chief coach at Leander Club, which is one of our kind of GB high performance centres in Great Britain. And so he became chief coach there. So I moved with him. And that brought me to Henley, which is a big rowing central place in this country. And so at the same time, friends in Guiseley had family in Henley. So I used to go around for dinner and just have dinner with them and they kind of looked after me and would just cook for me and pray for me. And then when I moved to Henley, I said, where do you go to church? And they went to church it wasn't actually in central Henley, it was about 5 miles outside. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So when I moved to Henley, I thought, I'll go to your church. But then they moved back to Yorkshire, but I still went to their church. And I remember turning up the first day and I turned up early. And as most churches, everyone turns up on the dot, on the time. And I turned up early and the ladies were just folding the sheets for the service. And so I said hello, and then I said, can I help? And then I started folding the sheets. And each of them thought that I knew the other just because I'd started helping. And then eventually they're like, oh, you don't know anyone, you're new. Sorry, we're getting you, folding sheets. And I'm like, oh, no, it's fine. And then they said, oh, sorry, our minister's away today. He's actually away in Liberia. And I was like, no way, Liberia. I was like, my grandparents are missionaries in Liberia. And it was like, again, just God being like, this is the place for you for now. And it turns out that my grandparents, because my granny used to help with looking after the missionary children, and she used to look after his children. And so, such a small world, but God just confirming along the way. And that was just such a blessed place for me, just to be looked after, actually, really. There was a number of couples, and I would just regularly go to their house to be fed, and then they'd pray for me, and I'd go home. And it was just really simple, but really encouraging and really supportive. They totally supported me. I was away for a third of the year. So as part of our training full time, we'd be away on training camps or competing. But they were brilliant with it. They'd just be praying for me. They'd be messaging me, making sure I was doing okay. And not just rowing wise, but just how am I? Life wise, am I doing all right? And so I felt really supported through that. Within that time, I also then went to uni. I was at Reading Uni and joined in a little bit with a Christian union there. Wasn't always around, but it was still nice to have that through uni. And so, I feel like I was really blessed with the churches that I was at along the way, who would encourage me, but also with Christians in Sport, specifically getting my nose stuck in the Bible. And along the way as well, discovering podcasts, discovering Christian music, which I'd never really properly come across before. Right. That was a growth of me just kind of, I guess, being nourished and encouraged by all different ways and spaces we can be in terms of, the Christian world and being resourced. And that, I felt covered and prayed for, which was a real blessing along the way.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I can imagine how easily you can come away from God when you've got such a key focus of sport and like the Olympics, elite level. It can become all about that, and God just has like woven people and situations in your life, which is so good.
And people giving me little devotionals to help me when I'm away on training camp, to work through them and to be encouraged by them. It was good.
So you went to Sydney as a reserve.
Yes.
Let's fast forward 4 grueling years, which it feels mean to fast forward through them. But, again, more training, more hard work, more seeking God, highs, lows. And then what's the next Olympics?
So Athens was the next Olympics,
Right, so that's an interesting Olympics, I guess, for you.
Yeah.
Your first time competing, right?
First time competing, And just even being selected for that, you're selected each year. So the years between the Olympics, it's always a World Championship year. So, 2001, 2 and 3 would have been World Championship years. And I remember my first World Championship year in 2001. I mean, it was an absolute shock to the system. I was good as a junior. I was good as an under-23, but the jump to seniors was unexpected for me. I was one of the top seniors, but the intensity of racing was just more than anything I'd ever experienced. For me, as an under-23 and as a junior, the races and the run-up to the final were hard, but not everything you've got. And then in the final, it's absolutely everything you've got.
Right.
Whereas my heat at the World Championships that first year, I literally thought to myself, I don't know how I'm going to get through the week. That was like a final, that heat.
Wow.
And so the jump was massive. So it was a tough few years. And we got some minor medals at World Cups. We have like a racing series called World Cups. But we didn't win any, or I didn't win any medals at the World Championships in my boats. So
what were you racing? What races were you racing?
Yeah, so I was in the double for those 3 years.
Yeah.
So continued initially with my doubles partner, who was a junior with me and under 23 with me, Fran. And so we raced for the first 2 years in a double. And then I raced in a double with someone else on the 3rd year. And each of those times we didn't medal. There's a couple of near misses, but we didn't medal through those years. But neither did the quad. So there was 2 sculling boats that were running. There was a double and there was a quad. So they decided in the Athens year that, okay, both those boats are right up there, but neither of you are medaling. Let's make the quad the top boat instead of the double being the top boat. So then we went in with 2 other people. And it was different. Like you get used to one thing and then the dynamics change when you've got more people and, the boat is faster. So technically it's different. But we were just, we'd built real good friendships by that point. And also the girl that had beaten me in Sydney, who, with my grumpy attitude, I decided that I was not going to be friends with her. I didn't really, I was just going to, that we weren't ever going to be in a boat together, which is not a good attitude at all. We'd become really good friends and we ended up in a boat together in Athens. And I just really enjoyed it. Like training was great. We were quite consistent. None of us had ever won a world medal before, but yet we seemed to click well as a crew. And we had high hopes. We did well in the season and the run up to Athens. We got a couple of medals in the World Cup series, so we knew that we were capable of being in the final.
Something, and you were starting to see progress.
Yeah, definitely seeing progress. And we went into Athens. Looking forward to it. Nervous, obviously, very nervous, but also just confident in our crew, in us being a good crew together and knowing we could get the best out of each other. Athens was amazing. I mean, they were really behind on their setting up of everything. And so it was still quite dusty streets. It didn't feel particularly Olympic, but that was also quite rustic. And it also felt, Athens is the home of the games. And it just felt super special, although it was so hot.
Right.
I mean, you're walking down to training, all the racing was really early in the morning because it got so hot.
Right.
We had like ice jackets on and long white sleeves that we'd be soaking in water, and it was so hot. But it was brilliant, and we had a really good heat. And it's really hard to, if I describe what it's like on that race day.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's also very odd because at that point in 2004, I'd trained full time almost full time for 7 years.
Yeah.
So, 7 years, one chance to get it right, 6 minutes to try and put that 7 years into getting it right.
Wow.
I mean, it's a bit crazy, really.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
But you have your routine. It's a very structured day. I'm a list person. I would write my list. I'd know what time I need to go to the loo. I'd know what time I need to eat. You tiny bit of breakfast because you feel so sick. And then when you boat at the, where all your boats are, that's where the grandstands are. So it's odd because you're listening to national anthems playing. You're hearing 30,000 people cheering and being crazy. And you're boating for your final, and you're trying to concentrate in this atmosphere, and then it's really strange. And you warm up, and by the time you get to the top, there's no one up there. It's super quiet. It's just the racing boats. I mean, I don't know what the word is really, but it's just
surreal.
Yeah. But you feel ready, and you practiced it so many times.
Right?
So you race back down to the crowd. So that noise kind of. These days, it's more popular, so the crowd's extended up the course. But back in those days, you get the crowd in the last quarter, really.
Right.
And it was amazing. I mean, we just set off. We weren't one of the fastest crews setting off, but we were confident in knowing that our kind of solid pace through the race would be good. And I just remember we must have probably been 4th or 5th out of 6, so you have 6 lining up on that start line. And we just had a brilliant race, and we gradually went through Australia, who were current world champions at that point, and we just knew we were going well. Are
you aware of it?
Yeah.
Are you able to race in the moment, or are you just going as fast as
definitely.
you can?
You have to race in the moment. Right. I mean, a lot of it is around the psychology of racing as well. You have different roles in the boat, like the person at the stroke, they've got to set the rhythm, they've got to be consistent, they've got to be like on the ball.
Yeah.
And then the next person is like transferring that rhythm down. And then the next person, which was me, would be doing the calling. So I'd be doing most of the like commands and the calls. And you've practiced that through the years or through that season. You know exactly what every word means. And as soon as that word is said, you respond in the same way. Right. I mean, there's so much that goes on, obviously behind years and then the hours and the hours and hours behind the preparation for that race. But then the person in the back usually is the one that is looking and giving calls and saying, okay, we're a length down, or we're coming back on them, or let's push now. And then the person doing the calls will then call that. So you have your specific roles because you have to be focused on you as a boat. Yeah. And so you don't want everyone looking and checking where you are and being distracted. And so it's very focused, but it is also you react to what's going on around you. And also as you're coming through someone, it gives you confidence because you're coming past someone. And I guess that was how we raced. We were able to do that through that race. And again, experiencing the noise of the crowd, because the World Championships, you get spectators, but nothing like the Olympics. Yeah. The Olympics is just... It's just different, even though you're racing the same people that you might have raced all season. Yeah. It's just different.
It's the one everyone wants to win.
It's different, yeah. It's the pinnacle for us, yeah.
So where did you finish in Athens?
We finished second. We finished second to the German crew, who had never lost that event at the Olympics ever in the history of that event.
Wow.
And so, we weren't upset about that in any way. We were trying to catch them up, and we would have loved to have won, but we were absolutely ecstatic with that silver medal.
It's incredible. I think I'm sat looking at a silver medal, and not everyone's going to be able to see this because some of them is a audio podcast.
Yeah.
But I've never seen Olympic medal, and Debbie showed me before the show, and it's an incredible thing.
Yeah.
Do you keep them somewhere special? Do you show them around? I mean, this is, I guess, the token of 7 years of hard work.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, I know. It's, this Athens one, it lives in my Athens sock. So my Athens GB sock, it stays in there. And often it's in the pocket of wherever if I've gone to a school to maybe to do an assembly or to show some kids, or I've been to a church to do an evening sharing faith and about my sport. It'll be in the pocket of whatever I wear. Sometimes I think, oh no, where is it? I mean, I've gotten better at putting it in the same place, but sometimes people keep them in safes and in locks. But for me, it is precious and it represents those years, but it's also for me to encourage others and
that's so nice.
share my journey.
It looks worn, it looks used, it's not, but I love that.
The ribbon's all bobbled.
It's not like this perfect thing that, you've kept in a glass cabinet for no one to see, if you're listening and not watching, it looks like really loved and really shown, and I really like that.
And receiving the medal as well, it's an experience in itself, because you finish the race and, you've given every ounce of energy that you've got. And so you've got nothing left, but you're ecstatic. We were so excited. And then you have to go straight to the press pontoon and give an interview. I mean, I didn't even understand what I was saying. I had no breath. I was just babbling something out. And then you go straight from there and you wait until you're directed onto the medal pontoon. And in that period of time where we were waiting, actually, again, in Athens, the security wasn't very tight. So a lot of the younger rowers, some of the under-23s had come to watch, and some of our friends had come to watch. They all jumped the barriers and swam out with flags. And the security guards were going mad on the side. And we were like, yeah, this is amazing. And then you go onto the pontoon, and, the Brits are amazing supporters.
Yeah.
Wherever we travel, there's always a sea of British flags in the crowd. And so, that was super special. And you don't even really say anything to each other as a crew. You just stand there with your arms around each other, because, and you as a crew, the ups and downs and the tears and the joys along the way over those years. Whereas I guess if you're watching it on the TV, you see the race and the intensity of the race and what happened and then the emotions at the end, but you don't know the years and years that have gone on behind that. Whereas as a crew, you just stand there and silently share that, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you navigate it, morally and theologically, because, a lot of what the Olympics stands for, and the culture in sport is obviously about self and about, glorifying this one moment or whatever. Like, how have you dealt with that? Like, through 2 Olympic medals and 3 Olympic games.
Yeah.
We all hear the story of the Olympic villages, right? How did you navigate that, both, with your friendship relationships, but also, keeping God first in the main.
Yeah.
That can't have been easy the whole time.
No, and I guess that was a process as well of learning and also understanding, where does sport sit in my life?
Yeah.
Where does faith sit in my life? And I think, I feel really thankful to God that even before going into that world, I knew that, I look back and some of the things, like I'd written something for our church magazine and I was like, oh, wow, I wrote that back then. And, I knew even before going into that I wanted my faith to be central in my life to everything. And I knew that, faith is not just for a weekend. Actually, it's my relationship with God. And I'm a Christian wherever I am, every second of my life. And God's got a work to do within that, both within my own heart, but also wherever he places me. So for me, first acknowledging that God gives me life and my talents and abilities and opportunities. And so, yes, he's also given me a love for racing. And just because I'm a Christian didn't make me any less competitive. I was highly competitive. But at the same time, I wanted to honour God in how I did that and how I represented myself and him within my sport, how I pursued it and the attitude that I had within that. And through those years, Do
you think you've done that well?
I think
Do you think other people would think that you've done that well?
I hope so. I think I've had many conversations with people through the years about, why I don't get as stressed as everyone else at trials and, how do you manage this and how did you not feel like a failure after, this event or that disappointment. And so I feel like I didn't do it well all the time. certainly. For example, like the Sydney year, and feeling like, I was motivated by hating the coaches for their decision. And, there was lots of things that I did badly, or not well. But, God helped me to see that and has grown my faith over the time. And also, he wants to transform us more and more into the image of Jesus.
Yeah.
And as he exposes our heart, then he's able to do that, and by his Spirit be able to do that. And so for me...
So as he exposes it, I love that. I'm just going to say that again, because I think that's a key phrase. Like, I'm learning as well in this conversation. Is so I like that. Like, as he exposes our heart, that's like where the work starts, really.
Yeah.
And so when you've got something wrong, actually, that's where the learning opportunity really is.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think, God has been gracious to, to save me and to rescue me. Yeah. But he's not just my saviour, he's my king. Right. Jesus is my king. And so that means that, he wants to lead every area of my life. And it's not just about being part of God's kingdom. Obviously, that is major, and it is what God wants for us. But also, he wants us to walk more and more in the freedom he has for us and be more and more like Jesus. And that is an ongoing, lifelong thing. And, he doesn't just want us to stay where we are. He has more for us, and more for us to know more deeply his love, more securely who we are in him. And I think through the ups and downs, that's been a big part of my learning in terms of my identity. It is very easy in sport, and I'm sure that anyone who watches sport will be able to understand this, in that, as a sports person, if you're doing well, if you're winning medals, if you are liked by the media, you can feel like you're in the right place. You can feel like you've got purpose and value, and that's true. You can feel all those things when you're doing well. And I would say for sports people, it's a big place where people build their worth and identity and value and who they are. But if you kind of take yourself out of that situation as a sports person, you can go from hero to zero overnight in an injury, in a loss, in a mistake, in something that you've publicly done in the media that's been not good, so, and then when people are in that place as a sports person, you can feel like, am I in the right place? I've lost my worth, my value. They did a big study after 2012, the BBC did a big study, and a big thing that came out of it was that people said, when I retire, I lose my identity, don't know who I am anymore. Yeah. And I think one of the big things that God showed me and taught me through that time was, like, you're not your results. Yeah. It is what you do, it's not who you are, and you're more than that. So he
showed you that before you finished?
I think
It's interesting you talk about identity, because it's like the next part I want to talk about is, I don't want to skip over, you then went to another Olympic Games and, medalled again and I imagine a similar experience. But, I my question's always then, well, your identity as a sports person, A, how do you know it's over? How do you know it's time to retire? B, what do you do? Because that's the thing that you've done. How do you transfer your skills? And like, what sort of happened for you around that time? So you've gone on and won another Olympic medal. Yeah. Did you finish that year or?
No, so we got a silver in Beijing, which actually was very different experience to Athens because we were gutted. We'd been world champions in the run up to that, and so there was big expectations.
So silver in
Athens was amazing.
You were like
elated, wonderful.
Same medal 4 years.
Same medal 4 years later, but we only wanted gold,
right?
And we didn't make it. We were winning for 6 minutes out of the 6 minutes and 17 or whatever it was of that race. And
do you know what happened?
We had a great race. Nothing went wrong. Right. The Chinese crew were just faster in that last quarter than we were. Simple. And
you didn't feel like there was a mistake?
No, nothing. Nothing went wrong. We had a great race. Wow. It was just, but we were absolutely gutted. Absolutely gutted. And again, by that time, for me, God had already helped me to understand that, my identity is secure in him. My worth and value is, I'm precious, I'm a unique masterpiece because I am a life that God has ordained to be. And that is the same for for every single person, your life is precious. You are precious. And for me as a Christian, on top of that, I know that I'm a child of God. And whether I win, lose, do well, do badly, I'm messing up, nothing can take that away from me. And so that is a constant and a security. And actually that's so significant within the ups and downs, because I'm not immune to the emotions of winning and losing. I was still gutted. So when we got that silver, I was still gutted. We were crying on our interviews, we were crying on the podium. But I know that's not my worth and value. And also it's still an amazing thing to have. And so it didn't leave me broken. And for some of our crew...
What about the other girls? Yeah.
It left them broken.
Yeah, wow.
And feeling like a failure, and still today will feel like a failure because of that race. And so for me,
I pray that
made a difference.
It's made a difference
for
you.
Yeah, it's made... It gives perspective. Life is long, and for that whole time of my life, I'm a Christian, I'm a child of God. Rowing was this bit, and it's been an amazing time, but there were ups and downs before that. There were ups and downs there was injury, where I had to lean into God and know my worth in him through those hard times. And so, for me, that's been a big thing, but also it's helped me decide whether to carry on or not. So each 4 years, I would always make the decision before the Olympics. So before Athens finished, I'd already decided I was going to carry on to Beijing.
Right.
Because I didn't want it to be dependent on results.
Right.
I didn't want it to be, if I win a gold, I won't carry on. Or if I get this result, I will or won't. And so I wanted it to be that I'm committing to another 4 years because this is where God wants me.
Yeah.
And
remembering that now the pain of those 4 years, right?
Yeah.
So it's getting harder and harder to make that decision, right?
Yeah.
So what happened after Beijing?
So after Beijing, I'd already decided to carry on for London because I felt like I'd still...
100% understand
Yeah, home games, amazing.
1,000%.
But also still just loving it and not feeling like God was calling me anywhere else at that point.
You've still got to qualify for London, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not giving you that
Oh, no.
because you've got...
No, every single year you have to...
Same process.
Yeah, same process. And, I might get selected year after... And then I'll ring my parents up and I got selected, and they're like, well, of course you did. You won last year. And they're like, no, it doesn't work like that. You still have to
stay at your peak.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to be good enough to be selected out of the people that are there. So London, which was an incredible games. London did it so well. Genuine. We didn't medal in London. We were disappointed with our result. We didn't have a good race. But I would still say that was the best games I went to. Okay, not personally results-wise, but games-wise, it was incredible to be a part of. Yeah. It really was amazing. Yeah.
Why? Because obviously from a winning perspective, from a worldly perspective, it was your worst games,
yeah,
right?
It was. It was absolutely the worst games in that sense.
But why was it your best games?
I think the atmosphere, the crowds, So the games that I'd been to before, the rowing's always in the first week. So the second week we get to watch other sports and go around and support Team GB.
Yeah. And
often we'd find that countries just cheered for their own people. And so at some events, so for example, individual events or diving, for example, someone would dive and then the few who are watching them from their country would clap and cheer. And then another country would dive and then their little pocket of people would cheer. Whereas in London, they just set it up so that they had people in the crowd getting Mexican waves, and the whole crowd was cheering for everyone.
Yeah, wow.
And so the experience that athletes had, wherever they were from and whatever result they had, would have been just like nothing else they'd ever experienced. And so I think that was part of it. Being at home games was also really special because a lot of our friends and family could come and watch, although that was equally hard because we didn't medal.
Right.
But, again, by that point... I felt really privileged to have been a part of that. Lots of people said to me, were those 4 years worth it? You didn't medal. And I'm like, without a second, yeah.
How were you doing up to the running it, like in the Worlds and the World Cups and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Like, did you know that you probably weren't going to medal before, or...?
We knew that it would be hard. I'd been injured that year as well. So actually 2010 in New Zealand, we won. And we had an amazing year. And then 2011, we just had a bit of a stressful regatta. We were right up there, but a bit of anxiety, looking around too much in the boat. We just didn't quite hold form, but we did all right, but we didn't medal that year. But we qualified for the Olympics. You qualify the boat, not the people. It's a bit complicated, but it was an important year to qualify the boat for the Olympics. And then in Olympic year, I had a number of injuries. I had a back injury, and then I had a cracked rib 10 weeks before the games. And so I was selected, and then I was kind of deselected.
Was that rowing or
just
else?
Just you're putting your body under a lot of pressure, and
that's got to be a sign, right?
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Shouldn't crack a rib.
Yeah,
doing exercise. I guess.
No, it's not good, is it?
No.
It was, and also cracking a rib is pretty painful. I mean, just living, just walking, breathing is painful, and that was such a hard time. I mean, even until 5 weeks before the games, I didn't know if I was going to be in the boat.
Right.
In the end, I was, and I ended up I was heavily strapped. I had an anaesthetic patch on,
right.
And we kind of got through, but it was disappointing, and I think you want to have the best preparation possible running up to an event, and we weren't able to have that. And again, that was because of me, because of my injury, so that was hard to take as well. But again, by that point, I was a seasoned rower. I'd been doing it for a long time, and again, I knew what was next. I knew that I'd done my absolute best, and actually I can't do any more than that. All I can put in is my absolute best, work hard as if working for the Lord in anything that he puts in front of you, whatever you do. So that was, it was a sad way to finish, but it didn't take away from my joy of being part of the team, and actually also being able to be excited about my friends who won medals, which was amazing to see. It was amazing still. And so I feel like I ended well, even though I didn't medal at the end. But also God had grown my heart and moved my heart to what was going to be next anyway. Right. So
you decided
in terms of the transition
before London that you weren't.
Yeah. So I'd already knew I was doing London before I finished Beijing, but at that point I also knew that was going to be my last one.
Right.
Partly age,
right.
Partly was ready for whatever God had next.
Right.
It just felt right.
Yeah.
However right it felt, it was still hard.
Yeah.
I knew that's where God wanted me. I did like a couple of months of mission stuff in Yorkshire, and then I'd taken a break until Christmas, and then I'd gone back into the prison service. So I was actually a prison officer at that point.
So was that the first?
I'd done some training to be a prison officer. I know.
Is
jumping.
So it's cool. So is that the first time that you've had a break for that long from rowing?
So I had 1 year off in 2009.
Right.
Because I felt like I needed a bit of a break.
Right.
I also wanted to train to be a prison officer. And so that's what I trained to be a prison officer, and I worked as a prison officer in that time. Again, that was something that God had slowly brought me towards. After Athens, I got lots of opportunity to do schools work and assemblies and encourage youngsters in sport and just to kind of work hard and do their best. From that came some mentoring opportunities with struggling kids, more disruptive kids, which I really loved helping with. And then did some work experience in a juvenile prison. And again, if you'd have said to me, not going to be a veterinary surgeon, you're going to be a prison officer, I'd be like, no thanks, no way.
Yeah.
But again, God just took me on those little steps, and that's where I ended up. So I knew that was going to be what I was going on to after London. And
so when was London? 2012, yeah. So you've 2009 sort of paused that career, but done your training.
Yeah.
How did that affect your fitness? Like having a year off, How hard was it to get back into it?
It was. I thought it would be really easy, but it's harder than you think. And I mean, I did maintain training through that time, but obviously not to the level of
3 times a day.
3 times a day. So I was still fit, but I remember, so I'd come back in the 2010 season, and actually it was fortunate for me because the World Champs was late because it was in New Zealand. So it wasn't until I think November. Normally it would be August, September. So it was later, so it gave me a bit more time. And I remember doing the World Cup series, and one of the press ladies came up to me and she was like, "Oh, Debbie, you're looking really good." And I was like, "Oh, thanks." And she was like, "Yeah, when you first came back, you looked like you'd had a good Christmas for a long time." I'm like, "Oh."
What does that mean? You know?
Basically means, yeah.
I know what it means. It wasn't very kind.
Yeah, I ate a lot of biscuits and drank a lot of tea and coffee when I was a prison officer. That was what I blame.
Funny. So obviously that you had a taste for that and it didn't put you off in 2009. So you leave rowing and become a prison officer.
Yeah.
How long were you a prison officer for?
So I went back after 2012 Olympics, and then I was a prison officer until 2016.
Right.
Yeah, so I stayed in for another almost 4 years in that time. I went back to the same prison I'd been an officer in before during my training.
Juvenile prison?
Juvenile prison, so under 18 males, just males.
Okay.
So quite high security as well. And then in my 4 years when I went back, within that time, it also re-rolled to adult males. Originally Cat C, and then it changed to foreign national males. And originally when that happened, I wasn't sure that I would stay, because I thought that I'd come into it originally because I wanted to work with youngsters. And that's where God had kind of put my heart with youngsters. But actually, as I worked with adults, and again, the capacity in which you work and the challenges which come up are very different with the different age groups. But I just realised that actually I loved working with people. And for me...
What do you think the challenges are? Because I'm probably quite... I don't have a better word for it, but bigoted in the sense I've never been to prison. I've never met... don't think I've met anyone that's ever been to prison. I might have, they just might not have told me. And I've got all I've got are projections that I know won't be true. Like, what is prison like?
Yeah.
How do you support and help people there?
Yeah.
What is the role of a prison officer?
Yeah.
Like, colour it in for me, because I've just no idea.
Yeah. Well, I guess, for me, and I'd never been in a prison before, I went in to get a bit of experience working there. And how I did that was very specifically within the gym setting. When I did my work experience there, it was within the gym setting, which I got an opportunity again because I'd been an Olympian. And so that was my original experience when I went in, but it was daunting. Yeah. I mean, you these big bunches of keys, you're going through locked door, locking it behind you, locked door, locking it behind you, locked door, locking it behind you. So it is a very different environment, and it's its own bubble really of environment and structure and system and hierarchy, and within obviously the running of the prison, but also within the prisoners. And wow, I was on a steep learning curve when I went in, and working with the youngsters. It's actually quite a volatile, place.
Is it you and them, or do you have relationships? Like, I guess, are you able to help in the way that you think you might be able to help?
So that was a development as such. So as a prison officer, your role primarily is security. Yeah. So you're keeping the prison safe, you're keeping the prisoners safe, you're keeping the officers safe, there's a structure to it. Your role also is to encourage them in whatever their potential plans are in terms of education or work or whatever they've got in their kind of sentence plan for development or relational or counselling or whatever that might be. So you are personal officers to a number on your wing, and so you will be making sure that they're sticking to what they're supposed to be doing. But also your general running of the wing, so you're on a specific wing, which would be maybe 180 prisoners. So you'd be doing head counts in the morning, then unlocking. They would go out for work, they would come back, they would have some food, they'd be locked in over lunch. There's a whole process. So partly your role is security, partly helping them to engage with whatever their personal plan is through their time there. But also, it is personal as well. Yeah. You get many opportunities to help those in there with personal stuff, writing letters, making phone calls, actually just chatting, because they have social time where they can be out of their cells for a certain amount of time, and they might play table tennis together, and you're just your security, but you're also chatting with them, keeping your ear to the ground, but also having conversations. And so to start with, I was not a liked officer, Because, yeah, I mean, I just, when there's all the rules and they wonder if you're going to stick to the rules and they're going to push their boundaries and see, what they can get away with. And, even simple little things like in the winter, you're only allowed one pair of jogging bottoms on. You can't double up because they can conceal weapons or conceal things. And so, and you feel for them because it's cold in the winter. So they'll come down with their double layers on and you'll send them back upstairs to come back down with one layer on. And I was not liked because, with a new person, they're like, well, wonder what they're going to be like. And I was like, no, I'm sticking to what I need to stick with. Yeah. But I also took the time to go the extra mile to help with things. And so I think I ended up gaining good relationships because, yes, I would never let anything slip and I would, be sticking to the rules like, we should. But I would also be going out of my way to help. And so I felt like there was opportunity to make a difference. I also came to the end of my first year there and to the conclusion that actually you can engage anyone. Given time and care, you can have real conversations with people. And I think
What's the reality, though, of the day-to-day? Like, does it feel like a safe environment most of the time, or does it feel like there's always something going on? Or, I've watched too many TV programmes, so
Well, there is always something going on.
Right.
But it can feel safer at times and not safe at times.
Yeah.
So I was, within my time, we had riots on the wing. And,
Right.
With the youngsters, you have up to 11 alarm bells a day. They
Right.
fight all the time.
Right.
They're breaking up fights a lot.
Right.
There's situations where you have to get a team together and go and sort a situation out. So the youngsters, it's highly explosive, highly reactive because, they're younger, they're working it all out. There's all sorts of dynamics going on. Right. So you have to be switched on and you can sometimes come into work and you're like, ooh, it feels heavy today. There's something going to happen. Right. You can feel it.
Right.
It's intense. But it's. I mean, I've spent probably the first 3 months crying every night on the way home because you see these lads fighting and very intense, but then they'll be crying in their cells later, and it's highly emotional and. Yeah.
How did you keep going? If I went to work and cried on the way home every night, I mean, you just made a different stuff, Debbie,
I mean, partly, that's where God put me. He gave me the heart to be there.
Wow.
And,
Is that what made you stick? Because you knew God had sent you there?
Yeah, I mean,
did you want to give up?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think so. No. I mean, it was highly emotional, but...
Wow.
Even though it might just be rare moments where you see sparks of hope and sparks of, they were listening or they did listen to that or they did appreciate that. Those small things kept me going.
Right.
They didn't need to be every day.
No.
They didn't need to be all the time. And also I formed good relationships with the prison officers.
Right.
You have to work well together because that makes a safe wing when you work well together. And so I really respected the team that I was working with and they were brilliant and they really helped me learn. It was a steep learning curve as well. And so, I mean, I've grown to be relational, from where we started in our conversation. I've grown to be so relational and really appreciate that. But also I think coming from a team background, I wanted to do that. I wanted to input into being a team as officers. And because that does make a safe wing, it does make, when you all work well together with paperwork and also with those that you're looking, having custody. So I think, it was a shock to be in the working world because I'd come from rowing where you're all motivated towards the same goal. You're all working super hard all the time. If you see something, you just do it. You're all on the same path. You've got the same motivation. You're heading towards the same goal. Whereas you go into the working world and obviously everyone's individials with their own various lives.
Making a living, trying to,
So I was like, what is this working world?
Yeah, wow.
But at the same time, I felt like I'd learned a lot within a team sport that I could bring into that situation. And so, I did enjoy my job, even though it was hard and emotionally hard too.
Why did you stop?
Well, when was that? 2016. So I'd worked with the juvenile age group, and then I'd worked with adults. And again, different things with adults, different kind of, not as volatile in the same way. Obviously, when things do kick off, it's serious, but it's not, 11 times a day. It's different. There's other things going on just to keep on top of. And I think I got to the point where, like I said, I realised that you can engage with people, but I also recognise that even if people want to change, and even if people really want to do things differently, if they don't have the support in the community, it's really hard to not be pulled in the same direction as you were pulled in before. Need to have something else pulling you stronger in the other direction. For me, again, faith comes in a big part of that because, faith is a heart change and, God transforms lives. And so there was partly that, wanting to be involved in the community instead, but also in some way being able to draw people to church, to offer church. In the prisons, they do have chaplaincy, which is brilliant. But again, my role as an officer, I could have my own conversations, but it's not as direct in terms of, being evangelistic or sharing, the good news in a different kind of way. So I felt like I loved my work. It's not that I wanted to leave that particularly, but I knew that I wanted to be more in the community and actually perhaps help people, maybe in probation with a probation officer or in that kind of work. So that was my plan.
Right.
So I'd made the decision that I was going to come out of that. And then actually I ended up having an opportunity to work for Christians in Sport. So they had been supporting me as an athlete. And then there was an opportunity for me to do that role and walk alongside other athletes to support them as they go on in their sporting careers, in their faith and in their sport. So I came out of the prison service to go into probation or that kind of area or social work. And then the opportunity opened up to work for Christians in Sport. And it just felt right. It wouldn't have been something I'd chosen again, but it really resonated and it fit with my life for that time. And so I ended up doing that, which was an absolute privilege and blessing to be able to, both give opportunities for sports people to hear the good news who hadn't heard it before, but also to walk alongside Christians and encourage them in their faith and in their sport. So that I still do that now part-time. But
you're a mum.
Yeah,
and
so much. Yeah.
So when did you meet your husband?
We met in 2016 when I came out of the prison service.
Right.
Which again, I mean, that's a whole other story. But if you'd have asked me when I was rowing, or even before I was rowing, what do you want in your life? What's the number one thing you want for your life? I'd say to be married and have kids. I thought I'd been married and have kids by the time I was 21.
Yeah.
That was the kind of life where I went to school. That's what happened.
Right.
And that's what I thought that I would end up, getting married, having kids really early. But then that was where my heart was at. And interestingly, I often got asked about, my challenges faith-wise within rowing. But actually, God challenges where our heart is.
Right.
And for me, my heart was that I wanted to be married. Mm-hmm. Even when I was rowing, I would have swapped rowing for being married.
Wow.
And so for me in that time, that was my biggest area of challenge. Not always in the ups and downs of rowing, but in being single pretty much for almost all that time was very hard and very challenging. And, God in his ways protected me through that time because it was, I didn't know any other Christians really. Along the way, one or two in the rowing world, in the rowing team. But it was very much not a Christian environment. And I when I look back, if I could tell my younger self anything, I'd say, don't cry over what you don't have yet. Because if it's meant for you, you'll have it when you have it, when it in God's timing. And, God's timing for me in those 15 years was to row and to represent him and to put my roots down deeper in him. It wasn't for relationship and marriage and kids. And so, I guess I look back and I'm like, oh, I cried so much
Wow.
over being single. Like, it was
Is that
so
because you saw
heart-wrenching.
other people having relationships? Or?
Yeah, partly other people having relationships, partly, you know, not being any Christians in my kind of life who were guys, partly then fancying and liking others that weren't Christians and wrestling with that. I mean, I think they were probably the times where I've said, I wish I wasn't a Christian.
Right.
I definitely had times where like, I wish I wasn't a Christian because I really want to like pursue that person or date that person but, you know, having had knowing the reality of God in my life and also obviously his spirit in my life and being, you know, aware of that enabled me to keep going. And obviously, you know, once you have that, you can't deny the reality of God. When I couldn't say, well, I just, you know, I would never be able to walk away because I know the Lord's got me. He's not going to let me go.
You never sound like you were denying God. It sounds like that you were just in a lot of pain because you wanted something and you couldn't understand why God wasn't giving it.
Definitely.
And as a young person, I recognise having chased relationship. It's something I desperately wanted and, you know.
Yeah. And God protected me. He definitely did because, I was desperate for that and felt like I was missing out and I wondered if I'd ever have that. And then I met my husband when I was 36.
Yeah, wow.
And got married when I was 37 and he is an absolute
Had you like written children off in your mind by 35?
Do you know what I used to say?
I don't have any children, but I've kind of
I used to say, which wasn't a good thing. I almost speak over myself. I'd be like, I'm going to be super nanny for all my friends. That's what I used to say.
Right.
So I'd be super nanny for all my friends. And then I used to think...
Well, it's a coping mechanism. It's not what you really wanted.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was a kind of like, okay, it was a coping mechanism. And also I used to think, maybe if I got married when I was really a lot older, then maybe we could adopt or, you know, I kind of run through these
looking
scenarios
at the other
in my
options.
mind. Yeah.
Wow.
But again, you know, that was, you know...
How did you meet?
We were online dating, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'd done online dating.
Like a Christian one? Or?
So I'd done online dating on Christian websites for on and off. And again, it never really quite worked. And again...
It's quite a cool profile though, isn't it, Debbie? Like Olympic rower.
I didn't put that on there.
Yeah, but how cool.
Put that on. I mean, obviously someone would get to know that if they ended up going on a few dates.
Or just look at your picture and be like, oh, it's Debbie Flood.
I wasn't recognisable as that. But it was, I mean, it's, yeah. But it was interesting. I mean, like how we almost put our own barriers up or make our own kind of like ways of defending ourselves, you know. I mean, even through the rowing, I used to, and again through like again from younger being rejected by guys and feeling like I wasn't good enough, but then almost taking on the rowing and be like, well, this is what I'm made for instead, and you know the kind of lies that we can soothe ourselves with, but they're not actually truth. And so for me, it doesn't matter that I'm muscling and I'm single because, you know, I can row. It doesn't matter that I'm not attractive. And all these lies that get layered and kind of ingrained in our truths, but they're not actually truth. They're actually lies. And all these things, you know, they don't just suddenly leave us. You know, they kind of push us and challenge us. And again, this is why I'm saying about God exposing our hearts and actually what we really think about ourselves or the lies that we believe about ourselves or that we believe about him. You know, if we allow him, he helps us to see them and then can bring restoration and healing within them. And so part of that process was me, you know, getting married and having Rebecca, and actually Yaku, my husband, he had 2 children already. And so even before we had Rebecca, you know, I felt blessed because I wouldn't have chosen to have married someone who had had a family before. Not because I wouldn't have actively chosen, but it never crossed my mind. Yeah. I just thought, eventually I'll meet someone who's in the same position as me. So, and again, the whole story of how we got together, you know, God just was in that in lots of ways.
Share a little bit. I'm interested. So, how would you end up with something you didn't want and yet you're in love?
I know. Well, so my best friend Beth, she came round one night and I'd been on and off dating websites and I'd had a couple of dates but never really kind of clicked and nothing had ever really lasted past a date or two. So I'd given up for however many millionth time. And then my coach, back to the original coach, Mark Banks, who looked after me, he was like, oh, you should go on this website. And I'm like, no, I want to be on a Christian website because, actually I was determined that I wanted to meet a Christian. I really wanted to put those things in place to make that possible. And, for me, I always came back to, because, I fancied people who weren't Christians and I could imagine life with them. But then I wanted to be able to stand beside my husband in church and sing and worship together. I wanted him to be able to pray for me. And also, I wanted to end up with someone who got me, understood me. Okay, nobody does fully. I've come to realise that now. But in my head, I wanted someone to understand me, and to be able to do that, my faith explains why I do things. It's obviously, like we said, it's part of everything. It's, I wanted to be able to share that, and
do you think that was your vision or God's vision for you? Because it seems like you've held out for that. Like that vision sustained of, you and your husband.
Yeah.
And does he sing with you at church?
He's in actually in the worship band.
Oh, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
That's so
He's
cool.
a lovely singer. And he prays for me.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it was,
so good.
it's God's heart.
Yeah.
It's God's heart for us. And, for us to draw closer to him primarily, but also be drawing closer to each other as we do that, because, he is the one that we're looking to for prayer, for answers, for guidance, for just assurance, for security, for everything.
Yeah.
And so it was my heart, but it was hard to hang on to that, and God helped me to hang on to that.
Yeah.
So then when we met, so we were doing online dating. I'd given up. My coach had said, go on this website. And I said, it's not a Christian website. I don't want to go on that. And he said, oh, but I think you can put your setting. So I went on and I put my setting that my faith was the most important thing in my life. And I wanted that to be the same on the other person's. And I wanted their priority for me to be that my faith was my priority in my life. Anyway, so I put all these settings in, and the only people it matched me with were Christians, or that's presented
seemingly,
as Christians on their
that's
site.
That's what they said.
Yeah, and so, I clicked on a few people, and certain settings in that you only get put together if you both do likes or whatever. I can't remember really. But I had, I'd kind of given up again, and my friend came round, and she just like, come on, I'm going to click on some people. And she clicked on Yaku. And I wouldn't have clicked on him because he had kids. And again, I've got friends who are single with kids.
Yeah.
It's nothing against anyone, but it just hadn't even crossed my mind that I would end up dating someone who'd already had a family.
Yeah.
Anyway, she'd clicked on him, and he'd responded. And I was like, oh, okay, well, he's responded. I'll go with it. Meanwhile, on the other side, he had been single for just over 2 years, and had come to faith in that time. So he'd had a real tough time in life. Everything had fallen apart, kind of marriage, work, just life. He'd come to faith in that time, just given his life to the Lord, totally become a new person. I mean, absolute transformation in lots of ways, and had decided he didn't ever want to be with someone again. He would just be a good father to his kids, and that it was him and the Lord, and he was absolutely happy with that and loving it. And then a couple of years down the line, he'd, a couple of things had come across his path. He'd watched some movies, and they'd had Christian dating in, and then a friend had mentioned it, and he was like, oh, is this prompting? So he'd looked, but he refused to pay for a site. So he couldn't see pictures, just profiles.
Right.
I didn't have the ring on my profile. But he'd just clicked on a few people, and obviously my friend Beth had clicked on him. So he clicked back on me, but he couldn't see my picture. Now, it turns out that I would be the opposite type to what he would used to have gone for in terms of physicality.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, that's my weakness in terms of my, how would you put it, my kind of insecurity, I guess, if you like, that had been built up over life.
Yeah.
So he couldn't see my picture.
That's one of the lies that...
Yeah, one of the lies,
spoke about,
and continues to.
Part of the gift that he's given you, Debbie, is your genetics and your physicality.
Yeah, and that was also part of him, the work that God was doing in his life in terms of coming from a non-Christian kind of lifestyle and life, and again the lies that he had within his own life and who he was looking for. And God just did a work. I tried to walk away from this a few times because I didn't feel wanted or valued. He didn't want to even kiss anyone because he just was so cautious. He'd had just a bad time. But that meant that to me in my head that he didn't like me. I mean, it was a real up and down, but in lots of different ways, God kept us together. And so when we did get married, we knew that it was of God. And then therefore, also as ups and downs have come along, because, you know, any relationship you have to work at, you have to forgive, you have to love, you have to, it's a growth together, you know. And we'd known each other for a year and a half, 2 years when we got married. You don't know someone in 2 years. And so God also used that to, again, expose lies, expose our own insecurities, and enabled us to work together to like walk forward together and to, again, get a lot of restoration, both of us, and healing in lots of areas of rejection, and God restoring so much to us in what we'd lost.
And have you done anything specific to help with that? You know, like when you've had issues, is it just, you know, you talk, or have you had outside intervention?
Yeah,
or something you do in prayer? Like, because there'll be people listening that, you know, relationships are hard.
Yeah.
And I'm just always interested to hear how other people, like, how do you do that?
It's interesting. When I came to faith, I ended up then being the one who was the kind of looker after her.
Right.
So friends would come to me and download, and I wouldn't always download to others. And I used to think in my head, when I get married, then I will be able to download, I'll be able to talk endlessly about my day, I'll be able to do all these things. And then I got married.
You've met a man before, right?
Well, this is the problem. I mean, when I got married, you know, again, being someone who'd always kind of looked out for others, I thought, you know, this guy's going to be so lucky. I'm going to be a great wife. And then I got married and I realised that I came in with so many expectations that I didn't realise I had, that I wanted to receive from him. And even in my head, I knew that I didn't want him to be the one that I relied on, that I wanted to rely on God. And I knew that, and we talked about it beforehand, but I didn't actually realise how deep set that was, that I did expect, and that I did have expectations of how he would care for me, that he would meet my needs, that he would be a mind reader, that he would know what I needed. And it didn't take long for me to suddenly realise, wow, I am actually really selfish.
Yeah.
But because these things, they, you know, in a close relationship, they get exposed, you know, and so that's been a journey for us as we've walked together. And I used to think that I'd be able to speak these things out, but I couldn't. Like, I found myself almost not knowing what to say because I couldn't express myself, because I hadn't learned to do that. I hadn't learned to, and that's been a process as well of me learning how to say how I'm feeling, because it feels too big that I can't even articulate it myself, but speaking it out helps me process through it. And so for us, we've been, you know, having little marriage books where we've got like a little, like a devotional per week. Things like that have helped because it gives you the questions to draw together. And, you know, obviously in God's timing, questions often have been related to, oh, well, this week, this happened and this speaks into this. And so for us to be able to process that through, but with good grounding in scripture. We did a pre-marriage course as well, which was really good. But again, you know, you think, oh, I'm sorted now, I've got all this. And then you go into a relationship, you're like, wow, I don't know myself. We don't know each other. We're working, we're learning together.
And in a blended family, you've got complexities because, you know, there's other people in the relationship. And, you know, I can imagine it's challenging. What are some of the challenges you've faced, you know, in your relationship? Are you prepared to share any of them that might encourage other people that are going through? Like, there's other Debbies sat at home, I guess, that are sat there thinking, you know, why am I watching this today? Why is, you know, God got me listening to Debbie Flood? And I think it might be something around, you know.
Different things. I mean, one of the first challenges that we had was that when we got married, we didn't mind where we lived, whether I moved to where Yaku was or whether he moved to where I was. In the end, he moved to where I was because I had a dog at the time and dogs weren't allowed where he lived. So naturally, we ended up in my area, in my space, if you like, in Henley, where I was. And that was great. But then Yaku had left a job to come to Henley, so needed to find work. And so we had our first year of marriage, Yaku didn't have a job.
Right.
And we're very, very different in just how we work. So for me, I'm super proactive. I'll be like pushing every door to see if it opens. I'll be like, well, God will keep it closed or I'll open it. And pushing on everything, I'll be like being super proactive, getting stuck in there. Whereas Yaku is the opposite end. So he'll be prayerful. He'll just kind of wait. He'll just listen to what God's saying. He'll read. He'll kind of get to know a few people. He maybe do a tiny push on a door. Right. So we're totally the opposites. Yeah. So even in that, understanding that about each other and understanding that it's not a morality thing, it's just that we do things differently, because it's easy to make it a morality thing. You know, why aren't you trying hard? Why aren't you pushing on the, what, you know, are you being lazy? You know, I'd come home and he'd be chilling and I'd be like, what have you been doing all day? And so that was a really hard time. And also, the first time Yaku ever met my dad was when he asked for my hand in marriage.
Right.
And so the second time he ever met my dad, we were getting married.
Right.
And then he wasn't working and he moved in with me. And, you know, my dad's, you know, ethos is like work hard. Like he's, you know, it's something that I've taken positive in a positive way, you know, with my sport and just trying to do my best. And, you know, my parents, you know, said we didn't have much when we were younger and we didn't, but behind the scenes, which I wouldn't have known, but they were savers and they did save. And so they worked really, really hard to save. And so enabled myself and my brother to put down deposits for houses. And, you know, they were real savers for us. And so then obviously from my dad's perspective, he was seeing, you know, he's worked really hard to save and help me. And now I got married to someone who's not working. Is he choosing to not work? And actually, you know, that was a really, really hard time. I'd never had any disharmony that I'd felt with my family, and this had brought in another level, but yet this, me and my husband, was now my hub of home and a life that God is, you know, we are now one and we are going on together with the Lord. And this
You've won Olympic medals. You've left home. You're definitely an adult at this point. For the first time, you're separate from your family.
So hard. And partly when I go back to saying, you know, there was ups and downs in our dating, which was good because it meant that by the time we got married, we knew it was of the Lord. Like we just did. And so when we hit these really hard times in that first year, both with the work, but also just learning to live together as a married couple, and me thinking that it was all going to be amazing, and then realising that I had a lot of insecurities and a lot of needs.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, just those insecurities being pressed on and exposed. And so it was such a hard year. But I think, again, my faith and being a Christian and also knowing that this is where the Lord, he'd drawn us together, helped me to keep going and trusting the Lord that, you know, if he needed to push more doors, then the Lord would be speaking to him, because I could see and I knew that he was being prayerful.
Yeah.
Like I knew he was. I trusted that. I saw it.
Yeah.
And so I then had to trust God that, okay, well, you need to, I'm trusting that you're telling him what you need to, or you know, that he's going to. So it was interesting. I mean, just very different ways of approaching life. Not a good or bad thing, but just learning how to work together, drawing on each other's strengths.
Yeah.
But also knowing where we need to learn from each other as well. And God using that really.
Yeah.
Particularly in that first year. It was super hard.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. So, you know, we're probably running out of time.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a great chat. But so what's next for Debbie? Like what?
Yeah.
You know, what can we be praying for you?
Yeah, thanks.
Like what's next in life for you?
Yeah. Well, so at the moment I'm working part-time for Christians in Sport still, so supporting athletes and encouraging them on their faith journeys. Also, recently in the last year or so, I started working for Christians Against Poverty. So again, that bringing back that community aspect of reaching out to those in need in our community, those struggling with finances, and in which can be a really dark place to be, and have lots of other areas of need within that. So that's where I'm at the moment, doing that, but also juggling that with being a mum, life, family. It's a constant needing the Lord to help me to get that right, get my priorities right, serve, yes, but also love my family well, and have energy for them. So it's a real balance going forward, but I think, the thing that I've learned through rowing and through the ups and downs of life with the Lord is just, what does he ask of us? It's to love him and to love others. Am I doing that? That's something that I come back to.
And love yourself.
Myself, yeah.
Love your neighbour as yourself.
Yeah, no, indeed. And that is an ongoing process in terms of also giving time for me to reflect, and for me to just sit with the Lord and allow him to love me and to feel that and to know that, rather than just be a doer. But just to, that is an ongoing thing for me, to not just be giving out in my work, but also, we need to receive from the Lord. I can't do it in my strength. It's not Debbie that people need, it's the Lord, and he uses us as individuals to bless them and show him.
Right.
And so, it's just ongoing, knowing how to do that well within the different works that I do, and for my family and for myself. It's a reminder. But it's a privilege to be alive, and each day God gives us is a blessing.
Yeah.
A blessing for us individually, but also potentially for others as we get on out there. Just for encouragement with that, be amazing.
Amen. Well, I feel like we've talked for a long while, and yet I've only scratched the surface, and I've tried to keep us moving, and yet got loads of interest. So we definitely have to have you on again and talk about some specific areas, because I know when we first talked, we haven't talked about any of the things that we talked about then. It's just such a blessing and encouragement to hear about success, but then how what normal life looks like, and to hear a few of your struggles, and really I hope that it encourages everybody at home. So we thank all of you for watching. Do all the things you're supposed to do. I guess we're asking everybody is go online, subscribe and share, because hopefully this will not only encourage you, but maybe one of your friends and family. I've got some thank yous to do. So first of all, Debbie, thank you very much to you and your lovely family for allowing you to come today. So a big shout out to all of them, because I know this is taking you away from them. So thank you to you and to them. Particularly, we have to thank the guys the other side of this wall who, point at the cameras, done the sound, and make it all possible. So thank you. We've got Dimitri, Trevor and Noah in today doing the production. And just finally a big thank you to everybody at home. So thank you for watching. It's goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Together, the podcast.